They say politics is the art of the possible. But what if it's also the art of the sinister? What if beneath the handshakes and patriotic speeches, beneath the polished smiles and promises of change, lies a machine designed not to serve us, but to consume us? Picture it, a grand theater. Velvet curtains, golden chandeliers, the stage is alive with booming voices, heroic music, and carefully choreographed gestures. The actors look noble. They speak of justice, of freedom, of a brighter tomorrow. But step backstage, just a few steps past the glowing lights, and the smell changes. Cigarette smoke, whiskey on the table, paper trails that lead not to the people, but to the powerful. The masks slip, deals are made in shadows, and suddenly the noble play is revealed for what it is, a spectacle. Tonight, we're going backstage. Tonight, we peel back the curtain and step into the dark side of politics. Politics is a strange creature, a chimera with two faces staring in opposite directions. On one side, it wears the mask of nobility. It speaks in lofty tones, draped in the language of justice and equality, a vision of humans sitting together in a circle, deciding how to live better, fairer, freer. You can almost hear the crackle of the first fire where people gathered thousands of years ago, arguing over how to share food, how to protect the weak, how to make sure no one starves when the hunt goes wrong. That side of politics feels like humanity at its best. Organized compassion, collective intelligence, the promise that we are more than just animals clawing for survival. It is the voice that tells us we can rise above chaos, that we can build structures where fairness lives, that we can create systems where everyone has a chance. At its most ideal, politics is an act of love disguised as law. But then there's the other face, the one that grins when you're not looking. The side that isn't about justice at all, but about leverage, about who holds the torch, who sits closest to the fire, who carves the largest piece of meat while everyone else pretends not to notice. Strip away the speeches, the documents, the flags, and you find a primal struggle, the age-old instinct to dominate, control, manipulate. If the noble side of politics is community, then this side is hunger, and hunger always wants more. It dresses itself in respectability, in handshakes and smiling photo ops, but underneath is the same urge as a wolf circling a flock. What makes this duality fascinating is that both sides are true, simultaneously, all the time. Politics is not purely cynical nor purely idealistic. It is the endless dance between the two, light and shadow entwined like partners who can't quit each other. One moment it delivers civil rights, health care, or peace treaties. The next moment it strips freedoms, siphons wealth, or plunges nations into war. It is the same machine, the same gears, spinning toward radically different outcomes. And here's the most unsettling part. Sometimes it's impossible to tell which face you're looking at. Is that politician's speech about equality a genuine belief, or just a stepping stone toward power? Is that reform about protecting the weak, or quietly strengthening the strong? Is that law a safeguard of freedom, or a leash disguised as liberty? Politics blurs the line so well that even the most cynical observers occasionally get tricked, and even the most hopeful idealists sometimes feel their faith curdle into suspicion. This paradox is not an accident. It's the engine of politics itself. To survive, politics must appeal to our highest ideals while exploiting our lowest fears. It must convince us it is both savior and enforcer, healer and hunter, and the truth is, we need it to be both. Humanity cannot survive without order, but order always comes with chains. We crave justice, but justice is always delivered by someone with power, and power is never innocent. Politics is not light corrupted by darkness, nor darkness pretending to be light. It is both, all at once, flickering like fire, warming and burning in the same breath. Politics has always been less about governing and more about staging a performance. From the moment candidates step onto a platform, they become actors, rehearsing lines that were written weeks before, modulating their tone to sound confident but not arrogant, approachable but not weak. The rallies with their waving flags and swelling music are not accidental. They're carefully designed to stir the same emotions that a great play does. The lighting, The slogans, even the pauses in a speech, all of it works like stagecraft. Politics isn't just about ideas, it's about creating a spectacle, convincing enough that we forget it is theater at all. When you watch a campaign trail unfold, you aren't witnessing an open conversation about how to run a country. You're watching the third act of a drama that's already been rehearsed to exhaustion. Questions from the audience are screened, responses are polished until they shine like mirrors. Even the spontaneous handshake with a factory worker or the unplanned kiss on a baby's forehead is orchestrated by teams who understand exactly how such images will play on the evening news. Leaders are not simply leaders, they are characters. The strong man who promises to protect you from chaos, the outsider who swears to tear down the old system, the savior who speaks in almost religious tones, offering redemption to a weary population. Each role is a costume, and costumes are swapped as easily as jackets when the season demands it. And like any play worth its ticket price, politics depends on storytelling. The world is too complex, too tangled, too gray for most of us to fully process. So politicians serve up something cleaner, a neat narrative, a hero and a villain, an us and a them. It is seductive, the simplicity, because it makes the impossible seem manageable. The economy isn't collapsing because of 1,000 variables, it's collapsing because of that enemy party, that faceless group, that shadowy outsider. Because politics, solutions don't need nuance when you have a villain to defeat. In this way, politics doesn't just perform for us, it scripts the very reality we live in. But the performance comes with a price. When the lights hit the stage, truth becomes a prop. Accuracy, detail, and evidence take a back seat to rhythm, tone, and emotional punch. We don't ask whether a line is true, we ask whether it moves us. We don't fact-check the story, we applaud the delivery. The crowd doesn't demand honesty from its actors, it demands entertainment, catharsis, the satisfaction of seeing their chosen hero triumph. The danger is obvious. Once the performance becomes more important than the policy, reality itself becomes malleable. A well-delivered lie can defeat a poorly spoken truth. A story that feels right can outweigh a reality that is complex and unsatisfying. And so the grand theater continues, curtain after curtain, applause after applause, while the real world burns quietly behind the stage. Fear has always been the most reliable currency in politics. It's older than ballots, older than kings, older even than written laws. Fear is what kept early tribes huddled together at night, obeying whoever promised protection from the beasts beyond the firelight. The formula has not changed, only the costumes. Instead of lions or spirits, the monsters are now dressed in modern clothes and modern labels. Terrorists, immigrants, radicals, traitors, the other side of the aisle. The threat may shift depending on the season, but the mechanism remains timeless. Create an enemy, magnify its shadow, and then step forward as the only shield strong enough to stop it. Fear works because it silences reason. You can spend hours explaining complex economic policies or international treaties, and most of the audience will glaze over before you finish your first paragraph. But whisper that their children are in danger, and suddenly every ear sharpens. Fear bypasses the rational brain and slams straight into the primal one, the part that screams survive. Politicians understand this better than anyone. They know that terrified citizens don't ask many questions, don't demand many receipts, and don't notice the fine print of the deal being offered. A frightened population is an obedient one, and obedience is power. Of course, fear alone is raw, chaotic, too unstable to sustain on its own. That's where propaganda steps in. The sculptor that shapes fear into something usable, repeatable, easy to digest. Propaganda simplifies what is messy. It takes 1,000 moving parts, boils them down to a slogan, and repeats it until it becomes second nature. A phrase so short it can fit on a bumper sticker, so vague it can mean anything, and so catchy it feels less like an idea and more like a tune stuck in your head. Once it burrows into your memory, it stops being just a phrase and becomes a lens. You begin to see the world through it, filtering every fact, every headline, every argument. The genius of propaganda is that it doesn't have to be completely false. In fact, it often works better when it carries a grain of truth, a real crisis exaggerated, a real concern distorted, a real statistic twisted until it fits the story being told. This is why propaganda feels so convincing. It echoes reality just enough that we don't realize it has been remixed, and the repetition cements it further. The more we hear it, the more it feels true. Our brains confuse familiarity with accuracy, and the lie grows stronger every time it is spoken. Fear and propaganda are two halves of the same tool, designed not to persuade us gently, but to overwhelm us completely. They operate like a hypnotist's rhythm, lulling us into a trance where we stop examining, stop questioning, stop resisting. And once the trance is complete, power doesn't need to justify itself anymore. It simply points to the danger it invented, and we nod, grateful for its protection, never realizing that the shield we cling to is also the sword at our throat. Power is rarely seized in a blaze of violence or corruption from the very beginning. More often, it seduces. It approaches gently, like a friend offering a hand, whispering promises of transformation. It tells you that with just a little influence, just a little authority, you could finally make the difference you've always dreamed of. It assures you that it will amplify your goodness, that it will give wings to your vision. For the idealists, this is intoxicating. To believe that holding the reins of power will allow you to bend the world toward justice is perhaps the most dangerous temptation of all, because it doesn't look like temptation, it looks like salvation. At first, the compromises seem small, almost laughable. A handshake with someone you don't really trust because you need their support for a larger cause. A slight bending of the truth because the truth is too complicated to rally people behind. A partnership with someone whose values you privately despise, because without them your movement will die before it begins. And each compromise is rationalized under the banner of the greater good. Each step into the shadows is excused as temporary, necessary, harmless in the long run. But the shadows are patient. They do not demand loyalty all at once. They ask for it, one concession at a time, until suddenly you realize you are no longer standing in the light at all. History provides endless examples of this descent. Revolutionaries who once burned with visions of equality and freedom only to become dictators draped in medals and paranoia, leaders who began as champions of the poor and voiceless, slowly transforming into guardians of their own wealth and power, empires that justified their conquests as civilizing missions, all while looting, enslaving, and silencing the very people they claim to uplift. The pattern repeats, because the process is not an exception, it is the nature of power itself. Power is not neutral, like a tool you can pick up and set down at will. It is radioactive. The longer you hold it, the more it seeps into your skin, mutating your intentions until you no longer recognize yourself. Perhaps this is why even well-meaning leaders eventually begin to resemble the tyrants they once fought. The very structures of authority they inherit were designed to consolidate control, not distribute it. And so, even if their original motives are pure, the architecture of power reshapes them, pulling them into the same orbit of self-preservation, secrecy, and dominance. The chilling truth may be that power does not corrupt so much as it reveals. It exposes what was dormant all along, the ambition, the vanity, the hunger for control that lay beneath the surface of noble words. In this way, power acts like a mirror, held too close to the face. At first you see the features you expect, but stare long enough and you begin to notice the distortions, the cracks, the shadows you never wanted to admit were there, and once seen they cannot be unseen. History is not just a record of battles and inventions. It is also a gallery of political shadows, a collection of moments where ideals walked onto the stage wrapped in sunlight and walked off dripping in blood. Rome is perhaps the clearest exhibit. The Republic was built on the promise of shared power, checks and balances, the idea that no single man could ever dominate the whole. Yet all it took was one ambitious general, Julius Caesar, to cross a small river with a loyal army, and the delicate machinery collapsed. He promised stability, an end to chaos, protection for the people. What he delivered was the death of the Republic itself, and with it, the birth of empire. A single act, justified in the language of necessity, tilted the arc of history for centuries. France tells a similar story, but with guillotines. The revolution began as a hymn to human dignity, liberty, equality, fraternity. Ordinary citizens rose against monarchy, demanding a fairer world, and for a time it seemed as though they had cracked open the gates of the future. But ideals, once placed in the furnace of politics, are rarely left intact. The revolution that began with calls for brotherhood ended with heads rolling through Parisian streets. Robespierre, once the fiery defender of virtue, became the architect of terror, the promise of freedom twisted into fear, suspicion, and blood. It is a cruel irony that the same crowd who cheered liberty one year could cheer the executioner the next, as if the dream itself had been swallowed by the very hunger for power it sought to end. Germany's descent in the 20th century is perhaps the most haunting echo of this pattern. A nation wounded by war, humiliated by treaties, and crushed by economic despair found itself desperate for a savior. Into that void stepped a man who promised to restore pride, rebuild strength, and banish enemies both foreign and within. His words were intoxicating, his narrative simple, his promises absolute, and the world watched as one of the most advanced societies on earth fell under the spell of darkness disguised as destiny. The fire he lit consumed millions of lives, and yet it began the same way it always does, with speeches, with stories, with fear dressed up as hope. But to treat these as distant lessons is to miss the point. The same dynamics play out closer to home, again and again, in every generation. The scandals of modern democracies prove that even systems designed to limit corruption cannot entirely escape it. Bribes tucked into back pockets, surveillance quietly expanded under the banner of safety, wars justified with fabrications so convincing that entire populations believed them, until it was too late. Even those leaders we call the good ones are not immune, because the game itself rewards shadows. Politics is not a neutral field where saints and villains compete fairly. It is a casino rigged in favor of the house. And the house, as it has always been, is power itself. The darkest trick of politics is convincing us that it exists only in parliaments, palaces, and presidential offices, as though corruption lives in marble halls far removed from ordinary lives. But the truth is less flattering. The darkness doesn't only belong to politicians, it lives inside the crowd as well. We like to imagine ourselves as innocent bystanders, victims of deceit and manipulation, but citizens are not just passive participants in this theater. We are its audience, its financiers, sometimes even its co-authors. The show would collapse without us buying the tickets, filling the seats, clapping at the crescendos, and booing on cue. Politics feeds on attention, and we provide the feast. It's easy to sneer at the politician who lies, but how often do we secretly prefer the lie? When a candidate tells us the world is simple, that our side is righteous, that the problems we face have one neat solution, don't we lean in closer, relieved to be spared the complexity? Truth is heavy, exhausting, demanding. Lies, on the other hand, are light enough to carry and sweet enough to swallow. So when we choose the leader who entertains us over the one who drones about nuance, when we reward charisma instead of competence, when we share a catchy slogan instead of reading a tedious policy, we are not being deceived, we are participating. Every meme we forward, every headline we repeat without checking, every joke we make about the other side helps keep the shadows alive. Politics thrives on polarization because division keeps the machine humming, and yet we provide the fuel willingly. We laugh at the absurdity of politicians, but we rarely admit how much we enjoy the absurdity ourselves. It makes the chaos feel like a game we can follow, even if we are only pawns on the board. And it's not just ignorance that binds us, but desire. Citizens don't only want justice, they want victory. They don't just crave truth, they crave belonging. To stand in a cheering crowd, waving signs, chanting slogans, is to feel a kind of collective electricity that no solitary fact-checking session can compete with. Politics gives us identity in us to define ourselves against them. In that sense, we don't merely tolerate the theater. We revel in it. We clap louder when the script flatters us, we boo louder when it insults us, and in the noise of our performance, the actors on stage grow stronger. The shadows of politics are not imported from some alien class of power-hungry elites. They are drawn from the human heart itself. Ambition, fear, tribal loyalty, the hunger for stories, the laziness that prefers certainty over doubt, All of these live inside us, ready to be tapped. Politicians are not magicians. They cannot conjure darkness from nowhere. They only hold up the mirror and let us stare. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all is that we rarely look away. Choice is the crown jewel of democracy, the gleaming promise that separates free nations from tyrannies. It is the ritual that reassures us we are not subjects, but sovereigns, that power ultimately lies in our hands. Step into a polling booth, mark your ballot, and for a fleeting moment, you are told you are shaping the destiny of your country. But scratch at the surface of the ceremony, and the shine begins to dull. What looks like freedom may be closer to a carefully managed illusion, one designed less to empower us and more to pacify us. The ballot often offers us a menu with only 2 dishes, both cooked in the same kitchen. The sauces may differ, one spicier, one milder, but the ingredients come from the same suppliers. Behind the slogans, both parties may be funded by the same corporations, advised by the same lobbyists, bound by the same unspoken rules of survival. They argue theatrically in public, while quietly agreeing in private on the fundamentals. Who deserves tax breaks? Which industries must be protected? Which voices will be ignored? And when those fundamentals are locked in, our choice becomes cosmetic. We are asked to pick between masks, not between destinies. This is the genius of modern politics. It doesn't crush dissent outright, it absorbs it. It allows us just enough space to vent, just enough room to feel as though we matter, while keeping the machinery untouched. Every few years, we are given a moment of theater in which we imagine ourselves as decision makers. But the stage has already been set, the lines already written, the ending already rehearsed. We are not writing history. We are merely voting on its costume design. What makes the illusion so effective is how comforting it feels. To believe we are powerless is unbearable, but to believe we are completely in control is equally overwhelming. The illusion of choice offers a middle ground, a sense of agency without the burden of responsibility. It reassures us that we have spoken, that we have done our duty, that we can now return to our lives while others handle the mess. And so the cycle continues. The same policies, the same outcomes, dressed up in new rhetoric, sold as transformation, while remaining fundamentally unchanged. Even when genuine alternatives appear, they are often pushed to the margins, drowned out by media narratives, or framed as unrealistic, dangerous, or naive. The system has antibodies that reject anything too disruptive. The illusion depends on stability, and stability depends on narrowing the range of acceptable choices. We can argue fiercely within that range, but step outside of it, and suddenly the stage lights dim. It is not that democracy is meaningless. It does matter who wins, and policies do shift in ways that affect lives. But the darker truth is that the most significant decisions, the ones that shape economies, wars, and futures, are often made far away from ballots, in rooms with closed doors where no citizen ever steps. And while we argue about the color of the cage, the bars remain firmly in place. There is a certain absurdity baked into politics, a comedy that reveals itself when you stop listening to the solemnity of the speeches and just watch the behavior. The grand chamber where laws are written often looks less like a temple of democracy and more like a kindergarten with better suits. Grown men and women shout at each other, pound on desks, and hurl insults with the subtlety of children arguing over crayons. These are the supposed stewards of nations, yet half the time they resemble actors in a low-budget sitcom that never got cancelled because the audience refuses to change the channel. The irony is that even as politics cloaks itself in seriousness, flags waving, anthems swelling, speeches about duty and sacrifice, it is littered with contradictions so exaggerated they border on slapstick. Leaders declare austerity while gliding into limousines that cost more than a family home. They talk of sacrifice while their private jets idle on tarmacs, burning fuel at the rate most citizens will never match in a lifetime. They legislate morality with one hand, while the other scribbles hush-money checks in back rooms. The hypocrisy isn't subtle, it's theatrical. It almost feels as though the system has leaned so far into the performance that it has accidentally written itself as satire. And perhaps this is why humor, even dark humor, becomes one of the few weapons citizens have left. When corruption feels immovable and speeches feel hollow, laughter cuts through the pretense. To laugh at power is to strip away its aura of inevitability. A dictator thrives on fear, but withers under ridicule. Because laughter reduces the grand illusion to something human, clumsy, fragile. Memes, late-night jokes, cartoons, they may not topple governments, but they poke holes in the curtain, reminding us that the emperor's robe is transparent, if you squint hard enough. The comedy of politics is not limited to individuals. It lies in the very machinery. Bureaucracies produce documents so tangled that even the architects of those laws can't untangle them. Committees are formed to study the inefficiency of other committees. Budgets balloon with line items that make sense to no one, yet slide through because no one has the patience or courage to question them. The absurdity compounds until it becomes surreal. A Monty Python sketch disguised as governance, and through it all, the public alternates between rage and laughter, because if you don't laugh at the spectacle, you risk drowning in its despair. Maybe this is the paradox. Politics is simultaneously the most serious game humans play and the most ridiculous. It decides who eats, who suffers, who thrives, who dies, yet it often looks like theater written by clowns with delusions of grandeur. The laughter it provokes isn't just amusement. It's recognition. Recognition that the mighty are fallible, that their grandeur is a costume, that behind the rhetoric and rituals they are just flawed human beings, stumbling through their roles. And maybe that laughter, sharp and cutting, is the only reminder we have left that the stage is not reality, no matter how convincing the performance tries to be. We are left with a puzzle that feels less like a neat equation and more like a mirror that refuses to stop showing us uncomfortable truths. Politics is both poison and medicine, savior and executioner, a force that builds schools and hospitals with one hand and signs away freedoms with the other. It is the paradox at the heart of human society, proof that our loftiest dreams are forever chained to our darkest impulses. For every policy that uplifts, there is another that exploits. For every promise of justice, a betrayal waits quietly in the shadows. And yet, despite knowing this, we keep returning to the system, convinced that maybe this time it will be different. Maybe this leader, this party, this movement will finally escape the gravity of corruption. The truth is that politics endures not because it is pure, but because it reflects what we are. It is a stage where the noble and the monstrous inside humanity perform together, trading masks depending on the moment. The darkness is not an invasion from outside, but an echo from within. Fear, ambition, loyalty, tribalism. These are not political inventions, but human ones, sharpened into tools that power can wield with terrifying precision. When we stare at the corruption of governments, we are also staring at the flaws of the species that built them. The line between citizen and ruler is thinner than we like to believe. That is what makes the dark side of politics so unsettling. It refuses to stay confined to distant capitals or corrupt elites. It trickles down into the way we argue at family dinners, the way we choose headlines to share, the way we decide which voices deserve to be heard and which can be ignored. The very forces that drive leaders to manipulate and control are the same forces that drive ordinary people to cheer, to divide, to silence. It is easy to imagine politics as a monster crouched in the halls of power, but harder to admit that it feeds because we keep offering ourselves as the meal. And still, we cannot walk away from it. For all its shadows, politics is also the framework that holds us together. It is flawed, corrupt, manipulative, and yet without it, chaos waits eagerly outside the door. To despise politics entirely is to despise the very structure that keeps our fragile order intact. This is the tension we live in, needing the very thing that we know can betray us. Politics is not a clean battle between light and dark, but a constant balancing act. A tightrope stretched between hope and despair, progress and regression, truth and illusion. So when we reflect on its darker side, we are not simply diagnosing a disease in our leaders, we are confronting something much larger, something woven into the fabric of humanity itself. The stage, the actors, the audience, they are all us. The play continues not because the script is perfect, but because no one knows how to leave the theater without tearing the roof down. And maybe the haunting realization is that, deep down, we are not sure we want to leave at all. Maybe politics is not a battle between light and dark, but a reminder that both live inside us. Maybe the true danger is not the corrupt politician, but the citizen who stops questioning, the audience who claps too loudly at the theater, the voter who accepts the illusion of choice because the truth feels too heavy. So the next time you hear a speech that stirs your heart, ask yourself, is it the truth or just a story written for your applause? The next time a politician offers you hope, ask whose hope and at what cost. And the next time you enter the voting booth, ask, are you truly choosing, or are you simply selecting which mask the darkness will wear this season? Well, politics will never be pure, but maybe, just maybe, by seeing its shadows clearly, we can stop being blinded by its lights. Pause. Low music swells. After all, the only thing more dangerous than the dark side of politics is pretending it doesn't exist.